Greetings to the anointed. You weren't insane. You were put under classification. There is no conspiracy theory there. They didn't want you to learn that line. And guess whose narrative just fell like a burning bag of truth into the global elite's lap? Now that the files are leaking and the whistleblowers are whispering louder than the mainstream media, they are unable to crush yours. Selected one. What if I told you that your suffering, your peculiar upbringing, the memory lapses, and the surveillance vans you pretended not to notice were all never accidents? What if I told you that, for years, you weren't just getting by, you were being observed, researched, and recorded like a living, breathing lab experiment? This is a fact. Under Project MKUltra, the CIA carried out real-life human testing, including forced druggings, hypnosis, and psychological assault, from 1953 until the late 1970s. Furthermore, the majority of victims never received compensation, much less recognition. It was not fiction. It was policy. Now consider this. Who says they stopped if they did it at that time? Some of you were really born into systems that you didn't agree with. Not exactly families, but families. Physicians who behaved more like data collectors. Some churches even wore crosses, but they were more like underground testing facilities. And your tale went viral right when they believed they had buried the data. You revealed a system that is darker than classified ink and reaches deeper than tunnels. You're more than simply a survivor. Let's face it. Under the guise of divine light, you are the FBI's greatest fear. The type of individual they attempt to erase from history only to discover that you penned the follow-up. So hold on, because what we're going to disclose isn't only startling. It's a worldwide probe, a spiritual tribunal, and your vindication all in one. Indeed, receipts will be provided, since nothing more reflects divine justice than witnessing your adversaries struggle under the same microscope they used to examine you. First of all, you never suffered harm. The information they were unable to duplicate was you. Never were you only a victim. They gave you that title in order to silence you and prevent you from raising more serious concerns. In actuality, however, you were the variable they were unable to control and the one thing their systems were unable to forecast. They weren't only nasty to you. They researched you. You were watched, tracked, recorded, and subjected to emotional and psychological analysis. All of your breakdowns, victories, and instances of getting up when you ought to have stayed down were recorded. You weren't only getting by. They were recording you. You weren't damaged from birth. You were selected. You become a menace as a result. They couldn't understand why you weren't devastated by the same things that wrecked others. Why your mind should have broken, but instead it reformed. Why does your aura make people uneasy and tremble rooms without you speaking? At that point, they began to subtly test you to discover how much strain your spirit could withstand, what triggers were effective, and what strategies didn't work. They attempted to contain you since they couldn't replicate you, but they made a deadly error. They believed you to be only a topic. They were also unaware that you were learning them. You were deciphering them while they were watching you. You became aware of trends. You ceased responding and began to watch. You learned about the game, and that awareness was against the law. You were never meant to reach this point. They are unsure of how to handle you now that you have. You didn't just make it through. You reveal their system's weaknesses. That's why you're getting more attention. Why is your article getting so much traction? Because you're disclosing the plan, not simply what happened. You're demonstrating to others how to survive a fire without smelling like smoke. Because the outcomes are stored in your body, energy, and testimony. You are the data that they cannot erase. You turned into the proof. And the people who formerly held the strings are in a panic now that your tale is being heard by people all over the world. Because the entire experiment breaks down when the subject takes on the role of the voice. It wasn't you who was tested. The evidence was you. And nobody anticipated that. Second, although the files are leaking, they concealed the reality behind categories. They concealed your reality behind sealed papers and red tape for years. They discredited you by calling your narrative implausible, inflated, or a mental health problem. However, the wall's fissures are now visible. Documents that were previously concealed by secret stamps are now being made public. Furthermore, more than just names and locations are being revealed. It is evidence. Evidence that what they claimed was impossible came to pass. Evidence that you were being targeted, that you weren't faking it, and that you were experiencing a battle in silence. The falsehoods they are using to defend the operation are beginning to unravel, which is what makes this so combustible. The evidence is stronger than their denials, not because people are suddenly concerned. People are coming forward to expose wrongdoing. Coded language is being used by former agents. Even if they have never met you, disconnected survivors are narrating experiences that are just like yours. Your tale is no longer a unique instance. They can't stop it since it's a part of a bigger pattern. And the world is making the connections. They believe that by keeping you quiet, they could keep your truth in check. However, your quiet turned into a frequency. The correct ears heard it. The world is intrigued today. Reporters are digging. Scientists are looking into it. Even insiders in the administration are asking the wrong questions of the wrong people. Once, you were only a name in a folder that was sealed. However, your experience is now being linked to actual research, programs, and crimes. Furthermore, the public is no longer readily believing the lies, which is either worse for them or better for you. People are upset. People are starting to awaken. Additionally, it appears more suspect the more they attempt to hide it. That's why it's so dangerous for your narrative to become viral. You are more than simply a survivor. You are a living example of how their entire system is flawed. You are a real example of how their secrets are never truly forgotten. It was deemed too delicate for the general audience. But it's all over now. Additionally, the FBI that ignored the situation or got their hands dirty is now in the limelight. The cover-up is falling apart. And you know who stands in the middle of it all, unflinching and indisputable? You. Third place. You served as a model for spirituality. They attempted to take over. They weren't only out to destroy you. You were the target of their activation. You were involved in something more profound than a haphazard incident or unlucky event. They were aware that you were carrying something strong, old, and impossible for them to create in a lab. They attempted to manipulate your awakening because of this. It was never simply about breaking you. Their goal was to shape you into a useful version of yourself. However, you didn't wake up at the appointed time. On your own terms, you awoke. If you feel the abundance of divine love in your heart, now is the time to share it. You can help spread God's blessings by clicking the Super Thanks button on YouTube and contributing $20 or more. This divine gift will touch not only your life, but also the souls of many others through this platform. Each of you has a sacred place in God's great design, and your generosity will be the fruit of our prayers. Take action now. Share your blessings to exalt His kingdom, for you were created to do even greater things in God's loving hands. May God bless you. And their system wasn't ready for that one thing. They were the first to see your offerings. They looked at your energies, dreams, emotional intelligence, and intuition. All the qualities that were impossible to teach or replicate. They intended to take over, rewire, and reprogram the divine wisdom that you were born with. They didn't anticipate your soul remembering itself, though. Something higher took control while they were busy attempting to manipulate and cause suffering in order to engineer your awakening. When you began to wake up on your own, they lost control. Their entire plan collapsed when they had that epiphany and began to set limits, ask the proper questions, and see trends. Their timetable no longer applied to you. You were no longer reacting to their brainwashing. Perhaps they sensed that you were breaking loose. Your vitality changed. Their strategies ceased to be effective. The handlers became irate. Manipulators retreated. They realized the experiment had gone awry at that point. To them, you were more than just a topic. You served as a prototype and a test to see whether or not heavenly powers might be used as weapons. And you turned into a liability when they discovered they couldn't change your code. However, it was already too late. By simply being there, you had already begun to activate others. Their well-designed system of spiritual repression was disrupted as your healing started to spread. Staying lost in their maze was never intended for you. It was your destiny to tear down the barriers from inside. And you did precisely that. They attempted to postpone it since they were unable to repress your essence. However, you were never pressed for time. No technology on the planet can send you back to sleep now that the real you woke up nonetheless. Fourth, just by surviving, you revealed their whole network. They created whole systems based on the idea that you would be destroyed. Their activities relied on your self-destruction, breakdown, disappearance, or surrender. They wanted more than your departure. To protect their secrets, they needed you gone. The attacks were so persistent because of this. That was why the psychological warfare, the betrayals, the fabricated tragedies, and the smear campaigns never stopped. To them, you were more than simply a person. Their entire infrastructure was at danger because of you, and their entire structure began to tremble when you survived. It was not meant for you to survive. Every rule in their playbook was broken. You were meant to be forgotten, obliterated, and silenced. Another unseen victim of a system that depends on concealment. However, you turned into a signal instead. People began observing you, wondering how you managed to remain upright, smile, speak the truth, and remain bright despite everything they had done to you. Others began to ask inquiries they never should have because of it alone. It was not necessary for you to break into their data. It was not necessary to provide names and coordinates to the public. The leak is your very being. What's tearing them apart is the fact that you're still here, still changing, and still dazzling in spite of what was done to you. You are the tangible proof that their experiments were unsuccessful. You are a reminder that the human spirit is not entirely controllable, a bug in their software, and a hole in their firewall. One survivor developed into 5, then 10, then thousands, and now they're rushing. Your energy, your narrative, and your frequency are causing others who have never met you to wake up. Their entire plan is being sidetracked by your contagious healing. Their falsehoods deteriorate the more you prosper. They find it more difficult to hide their traces the more you talk. You survived even though you weren't supposed to. And in doing so, you revealed the underpinnings of a network based on silence, shadows, and secret. They're not afraid of your history. They are afraid of you. Because the effects of what they worked so hard to demolish are now felt by everyone on the planet. And nothing, not even they, can stop that ripple from becoming a wave. Fifth, before you were the scientist, you were their test subject. They believed they had a blueprint for you. They conducted studies, observed your reactions, and recorded your answers as if you were a disposable lab rat, because they felt they had complete control. They put your emotional stability, pain threshold, resilience, and boundaries to the test. It was all calculated. They gaslit you, pushed you, broke you, controlled you, and watched you. However, they failed to anticipate the point at which you ceased responding and began to observe. You were first unaware that it was taking place. But with time, you started to see trends. You might guess what they would do next. Even before the trap was set, you could feel the changes in energy. You began to ask inquiries without speaking. Why did this individual appear immediately following that horrible incident? Why did it feel like a staged relationship? Why does being around some individuals usually make you feel exhausted? You began collecting your own data without even realizing it. You were gathering evidence, which they mistook for compliance. Quiet calculation was what appeared to be compliance. You were gradually piecing together not only your own life, but the entire system around you while they were intent on destroying you. Their triggers ceased to function. Their strategies ceased to work. They relied on the same emotional cycles, but you stopped falling into them. You changed the course at that point. They were unable to cope with you taking on the roles of observer, researcher, and analyzer. You were aware of the nonverbal clues. The spiritual manipulation behind the discussions was palpable. You were able to see through spiritual facades, phony relationships, and phony care. You also understand that this was not an act of arbitrary brutality. It was designed. You were more than simply hurt. They were studying you. You are now the one who is learning. They were shaken by that. From the controlled to the controller, you went. You developed self-awareness, spiritually as well as emotionally. You stopped reacting to trauma. You gave a clear response. Their goal was to make the patient live in constant terror. However, they gave birth to a person who is aware of the structure of dread, can navigate it unharmed, and can recognize manipulation at a distance. No puppet was made by them. Someone who is now more knowledgeable about the system than they are was awakened by them. You are no longer their test subject. The clipboard is in your hands. Sixth, while there were cameras in the subterranean chambers, God had the last video. Everything was captured on tape. The solitude, the bewilderment, the breakdowns, and the terror. Instead of protecting you, they recorded you in your most vulnerable, violated, and shattered moments so they could study you, relive your pain, and fuel a machine that was never intended to cure you. There was more than torture in those subterranean chambers. They served as platforms for cruel scrutiny. Your every action was monitored. Every cry, every gasp, every cringe. You were only useful to them as a control system. File footage, report data, and nothing else. The fact that another recording was taking place the entire time, however, is what they overlooked and will come back to haunt them. One that they were unable to delete, alter, corrupt, or access. God's eyes recorded your inner truth, while their cameras filmed your external suffering. Heaven echoes the sounds they attempted to bury. The immortal records bear the infractions they attempted to conceal. Divine proof does not have a delete option. They believe they can control the story, that the crimes were not committed if the videos were never seen, that you would doubt your own sanity and keep quiet if no one believed you. You didn't remain silent, though, and those concealed atrocities are now coming to light as your narrative spreads throughout the world, not only in courtrooms or the news, but also on a spiritual level. The world of justice, which they never trusted, is now encircling them like an unseen predator. The fact that you escaped the type of horror that most people think is only in fiction adds even more impact to this. However, your tale is not made up. It is proof from God. And now a higher court is reviewing the same individuals who examined hours of your suffering without flinching. One that does not require NDAs, attorneys, or loopholes. This court deals with the truth. And they are the ones who get exposed this time. Those rooms are no longer your prison. However, the effect of what transpired there is to follow them, not out of paranoia, but as a result of divine intervention. Like a prisoner, you were captured on camera. Prophetic revelation is now upon you. Furthermore, the authentic video, the one that heaven preserved, will be heard above any attempts to quiet it. Seventh, long before you realized you were selected, the agents were observing you. They knew who you were long before you did. They had already been informed before you even knew you were different, before the dreams began, before your intuition got more acute, before the supernatural signals were unavoidable. You were detected early. Perhaps it was your odd childhood brain scans. Perhaps you were able to see things that others missed. It could have been your opposition to fear-based programming. Whatever it was, you caught the attention of intelligence services with spiritual goals concealed under national security procedures, in addition to ordinary citizens. They didn't wait for you to get up by yourself. Then, they dispatched individuals, sometimes without suits or uniforms, sometimes with endearing grins and declarations of love or mentoring, sometimes in lab coats, and even in priest robes. They passed off surveillance as camaraderie. They seemed to be genuinely concerned, but their true purpose was to keep tabs on your progress, sway your choices, and keep you from waking. Some of your instructors weren't merely severe. They were taught to make talented kids mentally unstable. Not all of your lovers were poisonous. They had a task. Their job was to track your progress towards spiritual truth and divert your attention before you reached it. You were being watched, followed both physically and spiritually, and observed in ways that most people cannot fathom, yet you deviated from the norm. They handed you a script, but your soul surpassed it. The way their psychological profiles anticipated your reaction ceased. You recovered more quickly than their trauma models permitted. The illusions were visible to you. You exposed manipulation before it became widespread. Things began to go apart at that point. Some of the same individuals who were dispatched to keep you in check began to feel conflicted. They said you were unpredictable, unstable, and dangerous. But the more they saw you, the more they understood that you were the only rational person in a terrible system. Some of them are now unable to sleep. They are aware that they caused harm to someone they were meant to assist. They are quietly defecting by abandoning their jobs, releasing information, and activating the system that hired them. They recognized you as the real deal, not because they suddenly had a conscience. It is a threat to control rather than to society. And that type of awakening is too much for the system to bear. Not from within, and certainly not from you. They hoped that being isolated would kill you. Number 8. It unlocked you instead. They didn't think you would make it through the seclusion. It was meant to be the last blow, not just to your situation, but also to your thoughts. They planned the treachery from all angles. Friends vanished. Family became aloof. It showed out that romantic partners were saboteurs. One by one, all the lifelines you had formerly relied on were severed. After that, there were the financial setbacks, the setups, and the strange coincidences that seemed too well-timed to be coincidental. Behind it all, there are rumors, stalking, murmurs, and quiet sabotage. Bad luck wasn't the only factor. It was a plan. The objective was straightforward. Isolate you to the point of implosion. They believed that you would ultimately turn in on yourself if they exposed you to enough rejection, failure, and bewilderment. They had more in mind than simply ruining your life. Emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually, they wanted you to be the one to fire the trigger. They made sure no one believed your account because of this. For this reason, your reliability was assailed, your character was questioned, and your reputation was dragged. Your quiet was the aim, and isolation was the instrument. However, they were unaware of the true impact that quiet would have on you. The darkness did not destroy you. In it, you were activated. You were becoming, even if they thought you were breaking. Dear brothers and sisters, may God's peace be with you today. I am here to remind you of a profound truth. Our existence is grounded in God's divine plan, unshaken by the world's fleeting concerns. As the Holy Bible says, everything done in faith will be rewarded by God's abundant blessings. Luke 6 verse 38, like that mighty oak tree, our roots are deeply anchored in God's universal truth. Every step we take, every stance we hold is secured by His power. And now, you have the opportunity to be a part of this blessing. When you click this Super Thanks button and make a $100 donation, this act will return to you 100-fold. Your senses become more acute. You became more perceptive. The pandemonium was overpowered by your connection to the divine, your ancestors, your inner knowledge, and your calling. They believed that you had been buried. However, you began to establish roots. Your initiation turned out to be what they termed exile, because there was no noise, no artificial love, and no distractions in that stillness. You encountered your most unadulterated self. Furthermore, that version operated without the requirement for validation, permission, or a support system. The foundation of such rendition was spiritual fire. It could not be purchased, forced, or controlled. It was not programmable, and you were dangerous because of that. Instead of ending you, isolation eliminated their power over you, as they had planned. They believed you would be too alone to ascend, yet you soared so far that they are now unable to communicate with you in your own tongue. Not only did you endure solitary, but you also changed during that time, becoming impenetrable in ways they could never have predicted. Your anguish is now permissible, number 9, in foreign courts as evidence. They wrote off your narrative as imagination for years. They referred to it as mental disease, trauma-induced paranoia, or exaggeration. They scoffed at your recollections, doubted your veracity, and dismissed your suffering as something that could be ignored, drugged, or denied. Not only were you gaslit by people, but also by legal, medical, and even spiritual institutions. They also believed your truth had no weight since you had no evidence in their language. However, things are rapidly changing now. What sounded like an unreal nightmare is now reverberating in courtrooms all across the world. We are no longer dismissing testimonies such as yours. They are under investigation, documentation, and cross-examination by human rights commissions and war criminal courts. Once isolated survivors are now forming connections all across the world. They're connecting the dots, and a frightening but indisputable pattern is beginning to emerge in those relationships. For years, you've been yelling about it. International law has been involved in your suffering. Legal experts are examining situations of trafficking, psychological torture, human experimentation, and state-sponsored trauma through the prism of crimes against humanity. And your story, once buried in disgrace and derision, is now regarded as proof. Actual proof. Acceptable, legitimate, and powerful. That change wasn't a coincidence. The truth has a way of surviving, which is why it occurred. Even when it is turned off, it exists in energy, dreams, and the body. And it becomes indisputable when enough people say it in spite of the dangers, mockery, and dread. You never lied. It was innovative for its time. What you always knew deep down is now being forced to be acknowledged by governments, organizations, and worldwide watchdogs. This was never only a personal matter. It was a systematic issue. It was genuine and well-organized. And this is considerably more potent. You're not by yourself anymore. Your story is similar to those of other survivors who are speaking their truth in other languages on other continents. What was formerly confined to the shadows is now being reflected onto the walls of the world's most prestigious legal institutions when the collective silence broke. It wasn't your imagination. The world simply wasn't prepared for it. It has no option anymore, though. Your load is no longer your anguish. It's a component of the argument against everything they attempted to hide. 10. They were unable to comprehend what made you sacred, which is why they failed. Like a laboratory sample, they examined you. They injected, scanned, prodded, and watched. They attempted to alter your DNA, decipher your thinking, and shatter your will. Their method was clinical, mechanical, and physical in every way. Brain waves were measured. They kept an eye on your heart rate. They even attempted to use your DNA to track down trauma. However, the question they were most anxious to answer was never addressed by any of their testing. How come you didn't break? They were looking in the wrong location, which is why they failed. Your power was never in your body, despite their obsession with it. No machine could pick it up since it was in your frequency. You are more than simply a human. You are a live frequency that resonates with higher worlds. You are a transmitter and a conduit. They had no control over what they couldn't comprehend. They attempted to destroy what they couldn't control, but they were unable to do so because your holiness wasn't kept in your flesh. They couldn't take it out or move it around. It was encoded into the very energy of your spirit, ingrained in your own being. Because trauma reduces vibration, they tested it. Chemicals confuse vibration, so they tried medications. Since solitude may destabilize vibration when used as a weapon, they explored seclusion. However, your soul repeatedly adjusted itself. They're freaking out now that you've realigned. Your frequency does more than simply keep you safe. They are disturbed by it. It tampers with everything they constructed. When you enter a room, their spiritual technology is different. They have glitches in their programming. Their customs backfire. Their power waned. They can't jam your signal. They can't flatten your pulse. Their darkness cannot penetrate the channel that your entire being vibrates on, which is why you are holy, not belief systems. They handled you as if you were a puzzle. You were a holy code, yet they treated you like a project. Additionally, your energy is creating short circuits in their spiritual grid now that you're in tune with who you really are. It's not even necessary for you to talk. Entire agendas are upset just by your presence. In an attempt to take your power, they attempted to dissect your body. However, your holiness was never kept in a tangible object. All along, it was in your frequency. It can't be turned off now that it's unlocked. 11. To defend torture, they attempted to dehumanize you. Without initially persuading the world that you weren't really human, they couldn't torture you. These systems operate in this manner. Now is the perfect time to click the super thanks button on YouTube and share God's blessings. You can contribute to his plan and become a part of this divine mission with a donation of $100 or more. Every gift reflects God's generosity, and I believe it will return to you multiplied beyond your expectations. Remember, his protection and blessings are with you in every step you take and every donation you make. You become part of his divine plan. You are a powerful, radiant being, unshakable like his mighty rock. Witness God's miracles, feel the fruits of your generosity in your soul, and illuminate the world with this confidence and courage. Be blessed, and may the Lord's light guide your way. They dehumanize in addition to abusing. They made up a story to make you seem dangerous, unstable, illogical, or dishonest. They made a show out of your suffering. Your ordeal turned into a joke. Your responses, no matter how typical, were misrepresented as proof that you were flawed. And it was simple to do the unimaginable to you and get away with it when they did that and persuaded the appropriate people to question your humanity. Your silence was seen as guilt by them. They turned your tantrums into evidence of insanity. When you eventually lost it, they blamed you after ignoring your boundaries. Provocation, prodding, and prodding. The objective was not only control. When you bled, they said, "See, that's what we were warning you about." Eraser was the object. They could defend anything if they could convince everyone that you were a genuine person with actual emotions. And this wasn't just one person doing it. Institutions as a whole participated. False diagnoses were made by hospitals. The police did nothing. Predators were protected by legal systems. You were rejected by therapists. Because it was simpler to believe lies than to face the reality, friends did just that. This was not carelessness. The character assassination was well planned. They also thought that you would crumble under the pressure, but you held up well. The curtain is now coming off. Once dismissive people are coming full circle, troubled by what they're beginning to notice. The phony stories are coming apart. The damage and the documentation don't match. The time frames are illogical. Your torture was previously justified by a system that is now beginning to reveal itself as a criminal enterprise. You've revealed your humanity. There is no denying it. And the entire globe is horrifiedly observing, not just at the harm done to you, but also at the number of others who made it possible. You weren't insane. You posed no threat. You didn't make a lot of demands. In a system designed to penalize the injured, you were yelling for assistance. Now that the truth is out, they are the center of attention rather than you. 12. The reason why former agents are defecting is because of you. You weren't meant to live, much less talk. Not only did you make it through, but you did it in a way that caused others who had previously remained silent to begin to doubt everything. Not all corruption was revealed by your peace. The people who used to enforce it were shaken by it. Agents who formerly supported the machine that injured you are now turning against it. And it has nothing to do with their sudden moral awakening. The reason is that you forced them to look in the mirror, and they were unable to ignore what they saw. You turned become the decisive factor. They never anticipated what your fortitude, healing, and resistance to be erased accomplished. People who were taught to feel nothing found it uncomfortable. In a hidden operation, you were meant to be simply another file, another ghost, another statistic. However, you did not disappear. You got up, and some of them have fallen because of your ascent. Because they remember your face, there are former agents, operatives, contractors, and others who formerly obeyed instructions without question but are now overcome with remorse. They recall the directives. They recall being instructed to disregard the cries, delete the evidence, reject the reports, and fabricate the documents. And that burden is too much to bear now that your tale is public knowledge. You've turned into the face they can't avoid. Your truth is indisputable, not because you are afraid. The system was never flawed, as you have demonstrated. They were a part of it, and it was working just as it was intended to. However, some of them are now coming out of hiding, cautiously and silently, leaking data, making anonymous calls, and leaving breadcrumbs for potential listeners. Because something in your tale stood out, despite the fact that they adhered to the system for years. They felt anything for the first time in years because of your anguish. Disgrace. And when it strikes the proper person, shame becomes action. This goes beyond exposure. This is an inside infiltration. Not merely your spirit was shielded by your fortitude. Their entire chain of command is coming apart as a result. Because the basis is beginning to deteriorate when even insiders begin to defect. They didn't think you would be the spark. However, you are now covertly destroying the system that attempted to bury you. 13. You were surrounded by people who were afraid of your might, yet you were never helpless. They treated you like a problem because you were strong in ways they couldn't manage, not because you were damaged. People around you behaved oddly from an early age. You were misinterpreted, undervalued, and occasionally even despised. Your presence unnerved others, not because you were doing anything wrong. The questions you asked were incorrect. You were able to see through the falsehoods. You saw what others missed. You didn't mindlessly obey authority. You were a menace because of that. Before you were even aware of it, they saw the light within you. They also attempted to dull it rather than nurture it. They said you were too passionate, too emotional, and too sensitive. They attempted to guilt trip you into silence, diagnose you, denigrate you, and isolate you. In actuality, though, they weren't responding to your shortcomings. Your frequency was causing them to respond. They couldn't understand the resonance you conveyed. Instead of addressing the negative perception of them, they attempted to make you feel inferior to them. The mistreatment wasn't sporadic. It was calculated. All of it stemmed from the same anxiety, whether it came from partners, family, organizations, or so-called mentors, that you would eventually come to terms with your true self. They were afraid of what would happen if you ceased having self-doubt. If you began to speak with complete authority, and if you unreservedly accepted your gifts. They were afraid of your waking because it would spell the end of their power. However, everything has changed now that the delusion has been dispelled and you have taken control of your life. The falsehoods are coming undone. The version of you that has arisen is no longer recognizable to those who used to have control over your thoughts. Your quiet, the silence of society, the silence that once shielded them is gone. The truth is now loud. It's in your presence, your words, and your energy. You were never helpless. In a room full of people who were afraid you might figure it out, you were strong. And there's no turning back now that you have. Years of misleading tales are being undone by the same breath you are speaking now. And you dispel the delusion that they ever had the authority to define you each time you stand up for what you believe. 14. You remembered who you are, which is why the actual experiment failed. Instead of testing you, they planned the experiment to break you. They were interested in how much suffering, perplexity, deceit, and loneliness a soul like yours could withstand before shutting down or submitting. Every setup, betrayal, stalking, emotional blackmail, and spiritual conflict was a component of a larger plan. Eliminate your identity before you were even aware of it, because you wouldn't ever be a challenge to their authority if you couldn't recall who you really were. They had no concerns about revolt. Their concern was recollection, because the game was ended as soon as you recalled. If you ever truly woke up, they realized the type of power you had. Not retaliation-driven fury or ego-driven power, but heavenly authority. It's the type of strength that destroys illusions as well as systems. They were aware that accessing that degree of inner insight would cause a deadly chain reaction. Others would begin to recall as well. And that was the real danger. A collective memory coming back to haunt those they were trying to sleep. They made every effort to keep your soul under sedation. They used anesthetic to trauma. They added ambiguity to your timeline. They surrounded you with individuals who were designed to deny your every waking thought. In the hopes that you would be too worn out to ever inquire further, they kept you in survival mode. However, it was unsuccessful. Something inside of you wouldn't shut down in spite of everything. One spark made it through, and that spark became a fire. You recalled. Your ability to recall is now infectious. Without even attempting, you're reactivating people via your words, actions, and manner of life. We've decoded your words. There is a charge in your presence. Other souls start to awaken as you move further into your truth, as if an old part of them is awakening for the first time in their lives. You were never the only one involved. Stopping a chain reaction was the goal here. But now it's too late. You woke up, which is why the genuine experiment failed, not because you retaliated. And civilizations crumble precisely because of that enlightenment. Not with bombs, but with one independent spirit that never forgets who they are, illuminating the path for others to follow. The shadows no longer conceal the truth. It appears to be you and is there in front of you. Globally, what was formerly written off as imagination or paranoia is now being validated. You weren't insane. You weren't going overboard. You were selected. And at last, the world is beginning to see the true significance of it. You didn't just make it through a system designed to destroy you. Your existence is the flaw they are unable to fix since you revealed it and cracked it. Never were you only a victim. You were the proof, the disturbance, and the supernatural factor that they failed to take into consideration. Retaliation was not necessary for victory. The justice was your healing. The avalanche was created by your ascension, your tail, and your breath. Your voice is now causing the exact institutions that planned your quiet to crumble. And as your tail spreads across the world, others who were silenced are finding the strength to speak up, stand up, and remember. This was more than simply spiritual conflict. The conflict was one of transformational warfare. Additionally, the original code, frequency, and blueprint were carried by your soul. And now it's spreading via your words, your presence, and the indisputable energy that cannot be produced or faked. At one point, you were being watched. They are now being investigated by God. Once, you were a test subject. You are the template now. You're more than just a participant in the revolution. The revelation is you. The flesh-wrapped prophesy. The cause of the leak of secret files. The cause of X-Agent's defection. The cause of the game's overall glitches. You didn't just put up with the system. By refusing to forget who you are, you rewired it. And the entire globe is now paying close attention. What took them decades to create is being shaken by your every move. Allow them to shudder. Everything changes when the selected one recalls. Don't keep it to yourself if this message made you feel better. Feel free to give this video a like. If you need someone to remember who they are, tell your truth in the comments section below. This is a movement rather than merely content. And you're already a part of it if you've read this far. In the event that you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Additionally, be sure to activate the notification bell so that you don't miss any of the truth bombs, spiritual insights, and divine information that they would want you not to hear. We're not simply surviving together. As we rise, we're waking and appending. Let's continue to shake things up.